everyone. My name is Tara Jayakar. I'm the senior content editor at the Academy of American Poets. I'm so excited to be here in conversation with Sumita Chakraborty, our guest editor for Poem a Day for May in 2021. Sumita, hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's so good to see you.
Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you too. And thank you for being the guest editor. I feel like I say this every month, but I really mean it every month. I'm so excited for people to read these poems. They're
I had a
lovely.
blast. Yeah, I can't wait for people to see them too. It was just a really incredible experience. Thank you for letting me do
Oh my gosh, thank you for saying yes.
it.
So let's kind of get right to it. How did you approach curating Poem a Day?
Yeah, so in terms of content and themes and stuff like that, I wanted to let the poems tell me what they were going to be and what the entire month was going to look like. So I reached out to a bunch of poets that I really admire and read the work that I feel so deeply honored and fortunate for them to have sent my way, and started noticing a few developing themes and patterns, which I'm happy to talk about a little later or now if you want me to, like whenever. And I let basically those things I was noticing in the poems themselves kind of govern the direction in which I went to build a month around them that really supported them and held them up and identified resonances between them and all that good stuff.
Oh my gosh, yes, and you can feel it. Can you say more about what you wanted to say more about?
Yeah, sure. So a couple kind of narrative arcs that I saw developing across, I think, pretty much all of the poems is there's an interest in taking stock of grief and violence and pain in both the present and the past, both on a deeply personal level and on a kind of historical cultural level. And there's also an interest in reframing that taking stock not as something that'll necessarily kind of simplistically lead to redemption in any way, shape, or form, but it's a way for every individual or every community to be able to feel as though there's a space in the world and in the poem and in language for those pains and aftershocks to be held and supported and considered really deeply. So that was one through line that I saw developing. And I also, in the context of doing that, I also saw a number of poems that really celebrated peculiarity and oddness and coincidence and surprise and beauty and joy. So seeing those two narrative arcs kind of come together, they weren't separate things, not in the poems, not in the individual poems, and not across all of the poems. So I started trying to build an arc that followed and honored that when I was reading the submissions. And I think it's one of the things that I'm most excited about. I am not just by nature an optimistic person. I'm pretty fine with that. Like, pessimism has borne out pretty well. Like, I'm cool with it. But I also think that there is room within that pessimism, and it's something I always keep having to remind myself. There's room to even make that pessimism accommodate more textures of life than I think we're sometimes want to, or at least I'll speak for myself, than I am at times want to when I'm feeling particularly discouraged or low or distant or lonely. So I think that I was really attracted to the way that most of these poems made me do that. Even if they're very sad poems, there's something about a quirk of language or a sensory detail or something that makes that pessimism that I'm so naturally inclined toward here a demand toward more texture and more complexity and more like a more expansive palette of feeling. Does that resonate at all? It looks like it might.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I love that. Oh my
Well,
gosh, I love that.
the
Thank you for
poems are the
sharing
ones
that.
that took me there. Yeah, I mean, and thank these poems because they kept
Mhm.
coming. I mean, an inbox is not a happy place to be, even if there are people in it that you want to talk to, right? Like, there's nothing about email that is joyous.
Yeah.
Except for when I was soliciting these poems, because they
Yeah.
kept coming into my inbox and being like, hey, I realized you have like 45 pinned emails, but as Courtney Lamar Charleston says, it's important. I remember that the moral arc of the universe bends. So I'm sitting there in like a swarm of nonsense. And then Courtney rolls up with like, hey, here's another thing you should think about. It was such a gift to be getting email during this time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And the ways in which I've been thinking so much about like the ways that we're consuming content right now.
Mm.
And like it's all like these like short bursts, right? These like short, very
Hmm.
succinct bursts of information. But like the way in which opening emails with poems in them kind of help you track a journey of like understanding a thing over, like trying to think about a thing over and over and over and over again until you get to language where you're like, oh yeah, I see now how we got to this place where we attach to this language this meaning. And
Yeah.
that's a kind of clarity and a kind of that's it's art in a way. I don't want to like be cheesy, but it's a gift. It's art in a way
First
that's
of
a gift.
all, I love being cheesy. I'm like a really sappy pessimist. So be as cheesy as you want. And I don't think that was cheesy. I think it's just flat out true. Poems also, and my own book, okay, came out in September, which was literally nothing about that felt good in terms of timing. And I'd been looking forward to it for a long time. So I sat on various versions of that manuscript for something like 6-7 years. So I
Mhm.
was like, 2020, gonna do it. Not so much. But I think that in part, that experience reminded me that when I first got into this whole writing and reading racket, it wasn't about like the buzz of a tour moment, or like a tweet hadn't even been conceptualized as a thing, even though I love Twitter, so I'm not trying to disparage social media or even in-person content. But it was about hopefully creating something that might last. Like it was the long game. It was the longest of games. That's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to do it not because like I wanted to be famous or special or whatever, but because the work that I was reading had done it for me. Like it had lasted and it had made an impact, and it hit someone who, as a domestic violence survivor, and someone who, as a result, in high school didn't care about very much other than just like surviving and being very angry and being very sad. Those works that I started reading in college poked through all of that somehow from across the long arc of time. And some of them were Sappho, so it was like a long, long arc of time to be like, hey, you might like something about life. And that's what I wanted to do. And kind of in this moment, having this opportunity to read these new works by poets that I admire so, so much, they reminded me of that too, in the same way that kind of reframing expectations around a book release did for me as well. So it's been a year in which poetry and even poebiz has held lessons that in some strange, mysterious ways have returned me back to the most core things that mattered to me to begin with. And that's
Mhm.
absolutely true of this experience. And it's something that I don't take for granted or take lightly at all.
Oh,
See,
gosh.
I'm cheesy too. Let's all be cheesy.
Oh my gosh. There's so much more to say, but let's do the second question.
Yeah, you've got questions. I'm sorry. You have like
Oh,
a plan here, and I'm
oh
like,
my
here are my
gosh.
thoughts on poems and the long arc of time.
I
Sorry.
love it.
Please
Please.
keep going.
um, this is like the whole point of like why we do what we do. I don't know. Okay, so if you could direct what readers to one poem in our collection that you didn't curate, what would it be and why?
Oh, wow. I feel very stupid because I forgot to prepare
Oh no,
for this question.
that's okay. We can kind of
um,
reframe the question too if you'd like.
well, I think that I have recently been thinking a lot about another poem that was published. It was Tarfia Feyzulah's poem in January. Let me
Mhm.
just pull that up really quickly. I mean, it's probably good that I have to do this on the spot, because when I'm asked to do like, what is the one thing, I never answer with anything less than like 10 things. And the fact that I'm doing this on the spot means that I will most likely answer with just this one thing. Let me pull up this poem. I was thinking about it recently. I was actually reminded, by the way, Tarfia, who I really admire and adore. I think that the thing that reminded me again was that she declined to explain it, which I thought was just magnificent. I never miss an opportunity to be pedantic. So if someone's like, would you like to explain this? I'm like, hell yeah, finally someone wants me to explain something. So it's not a gesture that I would like myself do just because I've never missed an opportunity to be pedantic about anything. But I think in this poem, it works just so magically. The poem's called Surah. And the reason, it would work magically no matter what, because that's what she decided to do with her explanation. But when you read that in relation to the poem itself, it really draws emphasis to like the almost, it's like an imagism that is newly kind of charged and amplified with the stakes of every single figural thing that it floats out there. So it starts just so deceptively gently, right? The falling paper flower, the plastic tree branch, and then boom, the plight of reminiscing, the bureaucracy of kismet, and these strange juxtapositions all the way through the video game of intimacy, the comb detangling the scars. There's something about the juxtapositions and the way that they just float there, charged with their meaning and their potential resonances. And then the explanation is withheld as an act of generosity. The entire thing works together, like the poem and the paratext work together in a way that just I have not been able to get out of my mind since, and probably never will. So yeah, I think that's the one that I'd answer if I was answering on the spot. And then it also led me down a delightful rabbit hole of researching what a surah is in the Quran and how it's been used elsewhere. So I learned so much from that poem, and everyone should read it instantly.
So what else are you reading right now?
Well, right now, I am reading my students' brilliant MFA theses for the most part. I'm working with a cohort here that they're kind of my truest pandemic buddies in a way, because we were I was teaching their cohort in an all cohort workshop when we went virtual at first last spring. So it's kind of coming entirely full circle. And I've just been really absorbed in and in awe of reading and rereading their theses. I'm teaching the thesis workshop right now with the same bunch, and the way that they've transformed, like everyone should know these names. These names are going to be like brilliant, genius people, and I can't wait till they already are, but they're going to be that in a public way that everyone gets to learn from them, and I'm so excited for that. I think aside from that, whoops, sorry for if you're hearing a loud clattering. There's like a truck that was like, is she talking? I'm going to go by right now. Whatever. I think aside from that, a lot of what I'm reading right now actually clusters around my academic book project, which is about ethics and poetics in the Anthropocene, and how poetic interventions and how we think about and talk about death, especially in the 20th and 21st century, can serve as a kind of ethical resource for conceptualizing relationality and compassion and care in an epoch that is so marked by so many scales of death and grieving, right? Not just ecological, which is what we usually think of with the term Anthropocene shows up, but also the socio-political, the cultural, the personal, the medical, the violent brutalities that are race-based or gender-based or sexuality-based. Right. So I'm reading a lot around that. So that usually means a lot of ethical philosophy. In terms of poetry, I'm working on a chapter about Lucille Clifton, excuse me, right now. So I've been rereading the entirety of Lucille Clifton. And then for new books, I'm super jazzed about Rachel Menez's The Naomi Letters, from which in my month of Poem Day, we have a poem that didn't make it to the book itself, but is from like the drafting for that same project. So that's a really magnificent book. And so many more coming up and in the recent past, like my shelf, hold on. I think I'm going to regret when I see this later what turning around like this did to whatever my hair must be doing.
No, you're great.
I'm going to be like, why did I do that?
No.
Stop being spontaneous.
The act of reaching behind you and choosing poetry books from your own shelf is one that I will miss doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for
just
sure.
Like in real time.
Yeah, so I wanted to be able to hold up their beautiful covers. Here are some of the things I've most recently read that everyone should read. Some Are Always Hungry by Ji Yun. Beautiful. Taylor Johnson, pressmate, fellow Alice James, Inheritance. This book is brilliant.
It's so good.
It's so good.
I think about that book every morning when I wake up. I'm like, oh, remember that poem and what it taught you about communication and desire?
I wanted to solicit Taylor, but you all had recently published a poem from them, and I was like, rules. I hate rules. Alice Oswald has a new one. She's one of my all-time goats. Nobody. Brilliant. Beholding by Ross Gay is amazing, and the acknowledgement section is like an essay of gratitude, which only Ross Gay could pull off, and boy, does he. This is Sometimes I've Never Suffered, and I had to glance at it because sometimes instead of saying sometimes, I say some things I never suffered, which is just a great mistake that my brain does, by Shane McCrae. Brilliant. Yeah. And Eduardo Corral's Guillotine has haunted me since I read it. So those would be, I think, to wrap up all the plugging, those are all my plugs.
Thank you. So outside of the MFA thesis, which we've already heard about, and I'm so excited for, what are you currently working on now in your writing, teaching, and publishing life?
Yeah, so there's the academic book I was just telling you about. I had meant to do a lot of drafting for that over the summer, but circumstances shifted, and I've been really heavily in it during this term. So that's been really enjoyable, actually. In terms of poetry writing, I have a few odd things that are just starting to disparately come together that I'm really excited about. I've been working on a series of visual poems for a while, and I'm starting to understand how that impulse fits alongside my other things. I have a series, you all published one actually, it's called The B-Sides of the Golden Records. They're prose poems, and all of them are based on the 1977 Golden Records that NASA sent into space to teach aliens what human beings were all about. And my poems imagine or kind of inhabit what was left out from their very, very curated view of humanity. There's also some poems that I'm writing into like parts of trauma that did not fit in the story I was telling in my first book, simply because they lie kind of outside of the main arc that I first had to convey in order to be able to watercolor in anything else. So I'm writing some stuff in that direction. And I also have this weird new project that I've started. I recently learned, I don't remember whose journal, there was a writer who was afraid of music because, and I'd be able to tell you who it was if I looked at my notes, but I don't want to do that because I don't know which notebook it's in. And she was afraid of music because she thought like maybe it could get in your head and infect you. So I'm doing a very weird, it's not really a series, it's just kind of a bunch of poems that imagine that actually happening to someone. Not like maybe it'll happen, not speculative in that way, but just like it happened. What is it like to be infected by sound? So those are sort of the three poetry projects that I have kind of floating around. And since my first book only just came out, I'm in that beautifully luxurious time of being able to just follow whatever happens and letting if there are any similitudes or relationships between them, letting them just kind of tell me what they are and not feel like I have to impose too much order on the chaos quite yet. Yeah, so sorry if that answer's all over the place, but it's in part because I am in my poetry writing right now, delightfully over the place, all over the place.
No apologies. That's so incredibly exciting. I'm just very excited for the future with your work in it.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you.
It's true. Thank you so much again for sitting down with me. This has been lovely. And I'm so excited for people to read these works that you've curated for us.
Me too. Everyone, your inboxes are going to actually be places where you want to be. I kid you not. You don't believe me, but it's true.
Run, don't walk to your inboxes. Truly.
Yeah, for once. And then walk away. Like once you've printed the poem or screen capped the poem or whatever, that's fine. That's on you, but first get there.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Sumita. I hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.